Welcome to Season 7 of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. Real talk with those who pledge to keep us safe with grit, sacrifice and determination. Let's get on with the show. This episode of True Blue Conversations is proudly brought to you by Loudon Private Wealth, the team trusted by professionals, veterans and families across Australia to build real long-term financial security. If you want to take control of your finances, protect your future and build real generational wealth, Loudon Private Wealth are the people you want in your corner. They don't do gimmicks, they don't do hype, just smart strategy and honest advice coupled with real-world experience. Check out the links in the description to contact Warren and the team via loudonpw.com.au or 02 8313 0418. Now let's get back to the show. This episode of True Blue Conversations was brought to you by Dead Reckoning Rum, creating individual rum releases commemorating the diggers lost in Afghanistan, proudly supporting veterans, donating 50% of all their profits to veterans organisations around Australia. Look up Dead Reckoning Rum, buy some bottles, connect via Instagram and Facebook and give them your support. Now, let's get back to the show.
A very, very special guest on, and I'm coming to you live from South Australia, and this guest is absolutely amazing and an inspiration, and when you hear his story, you will just be amazed and inspired, as am I. And today I'm joined by Henry Young. So Henry is a World War II Navy pilot, and he also is still playing tennis at 102 around the world, and let that sink in. He's 102 playing tennis all around the world still. I don't know what my excuse is, but he's an absolute inspiration, and it is an honour to be coming to you live from his house and recording his story, because he's one of the only World War II veterans left, and a good friend of mine, Matt Ennison, the director of the War Memorial, we were having a chat the other day, and he informed me that in 2020 there was 10,000 World War II veterans still alive. Now, in 2026, there is only 2,000 left. So to sit with Henry and record his story for history is a real honour and a privilege. And so, Henry, welcome to True Blue. It's an absolute honour to have you on the podcast.
It's nice to be here, Adam.
Thank you, mate. As I said, you to sit with you, it's going to be a phenomenal chat. And as I mentioned, you were a World War II Navy pilot. But before we get into the war, talk me through life growing up over a century ago as a young fella. What was life like back when you were growing up as a young fella?
I had an idyllic childhood. I was in Glenelg and about 100 yards from the beach, so that really all those early years were virtually spent playing on the beach, and so I had an idyllic childhood.
What was school like for you? Was school? Were you a bit of a scholar back in the day?
Well, I'm part of being a Woodlands old boy. In other words, I went there as to kindergarten, so. And I remember the big plane trees. That's about all I can remember of those days. And then my father was a banker and was transferred to New Zealand when I was 10 years old. So obviously I went along, and so that virtually all my schooling was in New Zealand, in Dunedin in New Zealand. What was
that like, being uprooted from Australia to at a young age to then go to New Zealand and start again?
Well, as a 10-year-old, it was a wonderful adventure. You know, it was. And then when I got to New Zealand, they introduced me to rugby as a 10-year-old. Rugby in New Zealand is not a sport, it's a religion. so that started me off on my football career as a 10-year-old.
What position did you play?
In the forward.
Very good. I'm a rugby man myself, so yes, I was prop and second row. So yes, good game. And so when you lived in New Zealand, the Second World War breaks out in 1939. You were still only a young fella at that stage. Did you hear much about the war and what was happening in Europe when it broke out?
Well, I was still at school, and we had cadets, of course, and our head of the cadets was in the sixth form, as an 18-year-old, and he immediately joined up, and he came to say goodbye to the school, and my heart went out. I just thought, I'll never get there. It'll all be over before I can get there. And anyway, I did make it.
yeah, you certainly did make it. And so that happens, 1939, and in 1943, you did make it. You enlist, and you volunteered to enlist in the Royal New Zealand Navy Reserve as a pilot. Where did your love of flying come from, and what made you go down that path to be a pilot?
Well, I think it was Jimmy Melrose who flew out from England in a single-seater when I would have been, I suppose, about a 9-year-old, and that really, you can imagine the excitement of being able to fly out in a single-seater in those days, and that's when I suppose my love of flying started.
So, talk me through the process. You join up, Henry, and then what training do you do? What do you start to start flying and become a pilot?
Well, New Zealand was the only empire country that supplied pilots to the Royal Navy, and they shipped you straight out to England, and that, of course, appealed to me, and because I'd been a Sea Scout and I loved the sea, and so that I thought I can combine my flying with the Navy too. And the fact that they shipped you straight to England, that was another big factor. And so that you had to jump through a lot of hoops, and I made sure I could jump through them all. And so I was all set to be going to England in another fortnight when the Japanese attacked. And I don't know what happened in Australia, but in New Zealand they panicked, and I got a telegram saying, report to the Wellington railway station at 9 o'clock in the morning, you're in the army. In other words, the New Zealand army was in the Middle East, the Air Force was in England, and all they had back in New Zealand were the 18-year-olds, and I was an 18-year-old. And so that... And so they gave me a machine gun, and I sat on a beach and outside Wellington waiting for the Japanese to come. And then the Royal Navy said, what happened to those beautiful young men you promised us? And they said they're all in the army, and they're staying there until the Americans get down here. So the Americans did finally get down there, and they let me. Well, the Royal Navy said, you put them in the army, why didn't you put them in the Air Force, and they could have learnt something? And they said, I'm very sorry we didn't think of that, so we'll take them out of the army and put them in the Air Force. So they took me off the beach and put me guarding an aerodrome in the middle of New Zealand. So I've served in the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy.
So that happens, and then does that... You don't stay, because reading your notes, you don't stay in the Army, Air Force. You end up back in the Navy. And when do you then start to fly? When does this start to happen?
Well, the Navy always says that you're a seaman first, and whatever you are, you're an airman second, or you're an engineer second, or whatever. And so they sent me to Portsmouth. And that's when it was in the as you can imagine, then it was in the middle of the war, and the bombing was going on, and so that we did the preliminary there, and then at Portsmouth, the Naval College, and then they sent us either to United States or to Canada for our flying. And you had to jump through more hurdles to go to the United States, and I made sure I jumped through all those. And so that's where I did all my flying training in America as a 20-year-old. You can imagine what that was like.
Wow.
You know, all over America, learning to fly as a 20-year-old.
Yeah. So flying is dangerous, and what you were doing, you were flying like Spitfire to pilot, like Spitfires. That is dangerous, and you've only got to look at the history with Bomber Command, that they lost so many crews during World War II. You're in a very dangerous occupation. Did you have any close calls where it was close, or talk me through that.
Well, I think everybody does, and we went on Spitfires. Then we were on. I did my fighter training on Corsairs, then Dauntless Drive bombers, and so it really. And then they sent us back to England, where we did more courses, and then the war ended. You know, so in other words, I'd be probably one of the best trained pilots that never fired a shot at anger. So that the war ended, and that actually was an exciting time of my life, because the New Zealand Army, when the Japs attacked, they didn't bring the army home, and so they finished the war still fighting up at the top of Italy. And somebody said to them, "We've got all these All Blacks in the team. Why don't we form a rugby team before we go back?" And they all thought that was a wonderful idea, so they selected 30 people to go to Brighton to pick a team to tour England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales. And the Air Force got to hear it, and they said, "What about us?" And we fought the war too, and they said, "Well, you can send, based on your numbers, you can send 4 along to Brighton, and if they're good enough, they'll be chosen." And then the Navy got to hear of it, and they said, "Well, what about us?" And they said, "Well, based on your numbers, you can send 1 along." And they picked me. I'd captained the team that had beaten the Royal Naval College. You know, it was the first time the Fleet Air Arm had ever beaten the Naval College. And so that's why I think why they picked me. But anyway, so I'm in Brighton playing away, and you can imagine the competition to be in the team. And I'm down in the bottom of a scrum being tackled, and the ball was right next to me. And a great big Maori came up to boot the ball down to the other end of the ground, missed the ball and got my head, my nose. And they stretchered me off to some guys in London, where they took one look at it and they said, "It's such a mess, we'll clean it all out, we'll take a bone out of your hip, and you'll have a new nose." And so that's what they did. And, so that was fun. And then we got back to New Zealand, and so I'm then on the land. You know, I wanted to be able to pilot my own canoe, paddle my own canoe, and the land appealed to me, and so they had a soldier settler scheme there, so I put in for that, and they had to wait 6 months before I could go to the first property to learn how to be a farmer. And so I did 6 months as a deer shooter in New Zealand. Captain Cook, when he discovered New Zealand, the Royal Navy always took a few animals with them so that they could release them in far-flung areas of the world, so that shipwrecked sailors would have something to eat. And so they left. Captain Cook, released deer and pigs in New Zealand, and of course there's no grazing animals in New Zealand, and they just flourished. You know, in other words, they ate out all the country. The farmers would keep them down in the inside country, but back in the mountains they just ate everything out, and so that meant all the rivers and creeks were polluted, and that put mud and soil all over the land down on the flats. And so the New Zealand government then had deer shooters, which would go into the back country, and you went in pairs, and one would shoot on one side of the creek down the valley, and the other one would shoot on the other side of the creek down in the same valley. And when you shot that out, you'd go into the next valley on a camp. And so I did 6 months as a deer shooter, which I loved. So we lived on venison. And then I went on the land for 12 months in New Zealand, learning to be a farmer. And one of my friends who had flown with me during the war said, they're starting a fleet air arm in Australia. We should go across, because the deal is that the Royal Navy will supply the pilots for the first 2 years, while Australia trains up Air Force pilots to Navy standard. The Air Force hates me saying that. Anyway, so across we came, and I couldn't get there fast enough because I love flying. And so that we did our initial work here. Then they sent us to England to replace 3 of these Royal Naval pilots who were training up to go to join the Sydney, which the Australia had bought, and so that that's where I did my that's when I did my Spitfire training, because we did my initial deck landings was on a Spitfire, and I'm very proud of it. Actually, I've got a note in my logbook that I flew well under trying conditions. And it was trying conditions. The ship was going up and down like a yo-yo. And one of my friends went over the side, but he'd caught a wire, and they winched him back back onto the deck again. And was another one landed on bounced over the crash barrier, because you could only have the back half of the carrier in those days. It was before the angle flight decks came in, so you only had the back half to land on, and it was traumatic, but I loved it. And anyway, so that's how I came to join the Sydney. What I didn't say, in actual fact, is that on the way over, they sent me over on a cruise liner, the 3 of us, as first-class passengers, and that's where I met my good wife, Madge. She was on the ship. They'd sent her to England to get over what the family thought was an unsatisfactory love affair, and so they sent her to England to stay with her aunt, who was Madge Elliott, who was a stage star, and her husband, Cyril Richard, who was another stage star. Actually, they were doing The Merry Widow in London, and so that's where she was going. Not that I had Maggie as my girlfriend on the ship. It was 6 weeks. As first-class passenger. You can imagine that. Well, I wouldn't be a 20-year-old then. I would have been about a 22-year-old.
So a young whippersnapper, ready to take the world on. Talk me through. I've heard that the Spitfire was the Rolls Royce of flying. What was it like when you got behind the controls for the first time and were flying? Once they're in the air, are they just such an easy machine to operate?
Yes, well, they're so small. Coming from a Corsair, you've got a flap that you open on the fuselage to get in, and once you close that flap, it's getting into a Spitfire. It's like putting on an overcoat.
Yeah, right.
But once you're in, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's everybody's idea, I think, is to fly a Spitfire, and they're gorgeous, mate.
That I've seen, and I've seen interviews of pilots like yourself who have flown them, and they just said it's like a glove. It just fits once you're in. Once you get it in the air, it is the best machine to just manoeuvre, and it does everything you want it to do.
Except when you want to come to land one, because they're so responsive and they're so light that when you cut the throttle on a Corsair or Seafury or anything, they drop like a stone, but not a Spitfire. You cut your throttle and they just float, and that's embarrassing when you've got a crash barrier looming up in front of you, and so you've got to fly them what's known as on the judder. It's a plane doesn't stall uniformly. It has parts of the plane which stalls before the rest of the plane. And on a Spitfire, it's right next to the fuselage, and you get it shakes, and that's what they say. You bring a Spitfire in on the judder. In other words, it's just above the major stalling. It's stalling next to you there, so you can feel it. So when you cut your throttle, you stall. In other words, and then it drops like a stone. And
right.
So it's tricky, but you love it. It's what I love about landing on a plane, alone on a carrier, is that when you get a wire, then you hurtle forward, but the safety harness then wraps around you, and everybody says it's like it's a home to mother hug. You get to love it.
And that, as you said, that like you had your friends that they had the close calls, and coming in and landing on carriers, that would be a daunting thing as well, because but as you do it more and more, you get better. It's like anything, the more you do it, the better you become.
Yes, it's also too, you don't do it on your own, you have a batsman there who helps you. And the trouble is that because you're particularly on a Spitfire, you've got to be just above the stall, which means that your nose is right up and you can't see in front of you, so that you've got to do a turn to the deck, and you only just straighten up in that last 15, 20 yards, and that's when the batsman tells you when to cut your throttle.
Right.
So you're watching him like a hawk, and he's watching you like a hawk, and he's telling you to go up and down and do things he says that you should be doing, and, and you do as you're told.
Of course. And when you're up in the air, are you practicing dogfights and that sort of thing in your train, like when you guys are up in the Spitfires? Or because, as you said, the war had finished, but are you still just training and learning, and what's happening up in the air when you're flying the Spitfire?
Well, you do. They have exercises that you've got to go through, and you're practicing that, and you do dogfights, and you're practicing ones on target planes. It's a whole schedule of experiences that each one builds on the last, and so that. It's very, very thorough, as you can imagine. It's a very thorough training, and so really you've only got to do what you've been trained to do, and you're home and host. So,
Henry, talk me through post World War II, where we've got Korea coming up in 1950, but post World War II is New Zealand and Australia, are we flourishing as nations? Are we, and people are glad to see the end of World War II? Talk me through that.
Well, I think that everyone will acknowledge the fact that if you're an Australian, it's like winning a lottery. People come to Australia from all over the world because we are so good. And we're so lucky. And I think one of the great areas in which we are so lucky is all our immigrants. Immigrants don't just come to Australia with a suitcase. They bring courage with them. To come to a new country, the other end of the world, and learn a new language, and so there's one thing that each immigrant brings with him, and that's courage. And it's not a bad thing to have coming into a country. It's tens of thousands of people bringing You know, we've virtually searched the world, and we've got the cream.
Yes.
You know, I think we've got the cream.
Absolutely.
And we're just so lucky, and we don't celebrate it as much as we should, because we are really a lucky country.
And for you, so when does your time in the Navy finish, and then what do you go on and do post Navy? Do you go back to the land and become a farmer, or what do you do?
Well, you asked me, I think at the start, you know, there must have been some times, the tricky times, and there was a tricky time for me. We were on an exercise, and suddenly this was on the Sea Fury. Now, the Sea Fury was the last of the piston engine aircraft, and of course it was the replacement for the Spitfire, and all the air forces and navies were put in for it. But then the jets came along, and so that all the air forces cancelled their orders and to wait for the jets, except the Navy. The Navy thought we'd never get a jet plane onto a carrier, so we'll go ahead with our orders, so that we had the fastest piston engine aircraft. Not only the fastest piston engine aircraft, it was before the jets had come in, so we had the fastest plane in the world. You know, if any Air Force or any Navy in the world, and the Navy had it, and it was a wonderful plane to fly, and every Sea Fury pilot, you know, just has a love affair with it. And what I was thinking, anyway, in this love affair, I'm flying along one day and I'm suddenly fresh out of engine, and you talk about being quiet. You know, the time to appreciate quietness is when you suddenly have got no engine, and I'm in Northern Ireland, and all I've got below me, I'm below the overcast, and so I couldn't bail out, and all I had was paddocks with stone fences all around them, except for one paddock, which was a long paddock, and it had a clump of trees at the end of it, but with a gap in the things, and I thought that's just big enough for me to get through. Anyway, so I'm gliding down to it, and I stuck the one of my wings hit the side of a tree, and a branch of a tree, and that tipped me over. That's when I lost my port wing, which carted me over, and that's when I lost my starboard wing. They just snapped off, because the wings on the carrier planes, they hinge at the fuselage, and they both snapped off. And that gave me a loop, a half loop, and I landed on my tail, landing, you know, facing the way I'd come in, with my head about 6 inches above the ground. But being Navy man, we're trained for all this, and I'd tightened my harness absolutely bar tight, and the only loose thing was my head, and I'd cut my head open on the gun side. Anyway, they pulled me up, and it was actually the vet who did it, who was drenching cattle in the paddock next door. And he said it was very spectacular. Anyway, they took me to the crofter's cottage, and he wanted water, hot water, to wash me down. And I actually went out on the push bike about 2 weeks later to thank them. But she said, the only hot water we've got is in this crofter's cottage is an arm that swung over the open fire. Anyway, he said, we've got the only hot water is I put the porridge on, just put the porridge on. And he said, that'll do. So they washed me down with this hot water and porridge. And back in the hospital, at the Naval Hospital, the nurse there said how much they enjoyed the job that the matron had given the two nurses to sit on my bed, taking out the oatmeal out of my hair with tweezers. Anyway, they patched me up, and that's when they took me to another hospital, and that's when they gave me another nose. In other words, the original nose, which had been busted and replaced, that was all busted up, so they took it from my left hip and told me to be more careful.
Well, I can say I'm sitting across from you, and you do have a good nose now. It looks good. It looks quite nice. So if you hadn't have told me the story, I would never have known.
Well, it's. They say that if you take a bone from your own body, it recognises and doesn't reject it. So it's a good nose.
Yeah, absolutely.
I carry it around with me everywhere.
So, moving forward, after you leave the Navy and flying, what do you then go on to do? What do you then go on with the rest of your life to the current day? And we're going to talk about your love of tennis in a minute, because, as I said at the start of the podcast, you still play tennis around the world at 102. But let's talk me through what you did after you left the Navy.
Well, I wanted to, I'd had 12 months on the land in New Zealand, and during my last year in the Navy, I played rugby for the United Services team in London. In other words, on every Friday afternoon, they'd excuse me flying, and I'd go up to Sydney and play with the United Nations, not the United Nations, the United Services team. And I would stay in the Sydney. When the carrier's in port or getting a refit or anything, the Navy goes down to Nowra. So I would be excused flying on Friday afternoon, and then I'd go up on my trusted Indian motorbike up to Sydney.
Man.
And the first couple of weeks I stayed on the Sydney in dry dock, and I hated it. In other words, I stayed in my own cabin, but a ship's a warm, lovely thing, and it's got all noises, and every noise, and it's like, I don't know, sleeping in a morgue. You hear yourself walk along the passageway, and God, it's terrible. So I put the hard word on Maggie, my good wife to be. Could I stay with her when I came up to the Sydney? And this was in front of her mother and father. And before Maggie could give an answer, they both said, "Of course you can, Henry." So obviously I was better than the man she'd had before. So that's what I did. That's when I did all my courting over that time when the Sydney was in dry dock and I was coming up to play rugby. And so then I proposed to Maggie, and I didn't want her as a Navy wife, because Navy wives get all the hard work. You get all the glamour and they get all the work. They educate the children, take them to school and pick them up, and you have stewards to mind you, and you sit in glamour with a polished silver every evening in the mess. And so anyway, I didn't want that for Maggie, so I said she could have me as an airline pilot or as a farmer. And I had actually, when the Navy always goes to Hobart for the regatta, and one of the times when we were in Hobart, I'd taken out Wendy Hudson Fish, who was the daughter of one of the founders of Qantas, and that's when I was thinking of proposing to Maggie. So I said to Wendy, "Do you think that you'd be able to arrange an interview with Qantas? Because I'd like to leave the Navy and be an airline pilot." And she said, "Of course I can, Henry." When I went to Qantas, seeing that the interview had been arranged by the daughter of one of the founders, they're all over me like a rash, and they looked at my logbook and said, yes, they would love me, but they weren't taking on any pilots at the time, but I'd be the top of the list. And so when I proposed to Maggie, that's when I said she could have me as an airline pilot or as a farmer. And she said, "I'd rather have you as a farmer. I see a bit more of you." So that's how I became a farmer.
Right. And what is you being a farmer? I've spoken to a lot of people that live on the land and they love the land. And most most veterans and first responders that I've ever spoken to struggle with transition. How was your transition? And being on the land, did that help because you had purpose, you had direction because you were living on land?
Well, I had to, first of all, I started putting in for soldier settler blocks, and for every one I put in, there'd be another 2,000 that would put in for the same block. And that's when I heard of the AMP Land Development Scheme. And at the time I was working on a sheep stud a cattle stud in the Hunter Valley, in Scone. And so that I applied, and for everyone I put in, there would be another 2,000. Then I heard of the AMP Land Development Scheme. Come and work for us for 5 years developing land from scrub, and we'll finance you 100% for your stock, your house, your fences, the whole shooting box.
Yeah, right.
And we couldn't get there fast enough, in other words. So I did my 5 years on the AMP land, developing it from scrub to, it was past trace element deficient land. And once you put in a handful of copper and zinc, it was as good as any other country in the world. And so that after 5 years, the settlers drew their properties out of a hat. In other words, every year there'd be about another 10 or 15 blocks, and the next 10 or 15, depending on when you joined, would draw their property out of a hat. And by that time I was stock overseer, and I didn't like any of the properties that were coming up. So I went to them cap in hand and said, could I work for you for another 12 months and choose my block? And they said, yes, you can do that. And because they wanted me. And so that's how I came to get landfall, which was a pick block. In other words, as stock overseer, I knew the properties, and I knew them all, and that was the one that I wanted, and that's the one that I got. And then by that time the AMP had realised that it was virtually not impossible, but very, very difficult to give a man 100% finance and expect him to be able to make a go of it, because you still had to put in all the fences, and so it was difficult. And so as the property next door to me came up, and through the development bank, which has stopped now, but it was a wonderful thing at the time. If you came to them with a proposition which would be for the good of Australia, they would finance it. And they'd look at it, and if the prospects of success were good, even though you didn't have the backing, they would back you. So I went to them cap in hand and said the property next door to me is coming up, and it's only partly developed, so it's obviously good for Australia for me to develop it, and they agreed with me, and they gave me the finance to buy that. And then 12 months later I went to them again and said I wanted more money. And they said, well, what extra finance have you got? And I said, come and revalue the property, because by virtue of the last loan, it's now worth more. And they did that. And it was worth more, and they did it. And they did it 7 times. 7 times. Over about the next 5 or 7 years, they did it. And each time I'd say, you're not backing a horse you don't know. I've got form. And they did it. And they actually closed it then, because I would have bought the whole of Australia. I bought the property on the other side, and we developed. And so, that's how I got ahead. It's a matter of grabbing your opportunities when they come, and if they don't come, you've got to make them. And I kept on looking for opportunities, and that's what you've got to do in life, I think, is grab your opportunities and go for it. And even if you don't make it that time, next time you have a go, you're experienced. You know the pitfalls.
Yeah, and so were you mainly running cattle and sheep on the property, or what were you? Or were you a mix of everything?
Well, I had originally cattle as well as sheep, but then I did. There's more money in sheep. There's more work in sheep. That's why there's more money in sheep, and I'd crop about 600 acres every year, which I'd undersow to lucerne, and lucerne is only really good for about 6 or 7 years, so that's just ideal is there, so that. So the fat lambs were my job. In actual fact, I've always been a party man, I suppose. I was up to my eyebrows then in the Stock Owners Association, so I'd become chairman of the State Lamb Committee, and I was on the council, and it's I like having some input into whatever I'm doing, and that gave me the input, and so yes, it was an exciting time on the land.
And being that you're now 102 and you have seen so much change in those 102 years, looking back now, and I speak to my grandfather who is 92. He says he lived in the best times of where Australia was such, we manufactured everything, we were so self-sufficient. What do you see Australia being at the moment? Do you still see it as that lucky, we're that lucky country, or has it changed? And what do you see from when you were, 100 years ago to what it is today?
Well, we're still in a flux. In other words, we're a young country, and we've got so much opportunity in Australia. And you've got to be looking for them. But I think that we've got a wonderful future ahead of us. We've got the land. We've got we don't have our neighbours is the sea. And that's a wonderful neighbour to have. We don't have any problems with people looking over the fence and wanting our land. We've got it, and so I think that we've got a bright future as long as we grab it. In other words, it just doesn't happen. And I think I said before, we've got all these people in from all over the world, all with courage. And that's what you've got to have as a country as well as there. Not be afraid of the future. There's nothing worse than a barrel of turgid worms. What you've got to do is have those worms all struggling and because then you can work your way up. If it's all solid on top of you, you don't have any opportunity, but if it's all writhing and heaving and then you can go wiggle and wiggle, get your way up to the top, and that's where we are. We're there. We're a young, vibrant country, and we've got the courage, and that's all that you need in the world is courage to get out and get under. And even if you don't make it, you're more experienced next time. You know the pitfalls, and that's where we are now. We're a young, struggling country, but we're alive. We've got the world in front of us.
Absolutely. And now I want to talk about your love of tennis, and you go around the world and you still play 4 times a week here in Adelaide, which is just amazing. When I said that to my friends that I was coming down to interview you, and that you still play tennis at 102 and you hold you play masters tennis all around the world. When did you get into tennis, and where does your love of the game come from?
I'm competitive, Obviously, I'm competitive, and that's what I love about tennis. It is a competitive sport, and the games that you appreciate and remember most are the ones that you've had to struggle hard against. They're the ones that it's very nice to be able to come up and congratulate your opponents on their wins, but to be able to say that you had to work for it. And they'll laugh, and they and they will appreciate it. You know,
of course.
It's good. So win or lose, it's a wonderful game, and I love that competitive side of it, and so I suppose that's what I like most about it.
And you've just come back from Italy, and have you always played tennis from a young age, or did that come later in life?
Well, I played, you know, a little bit of tennis when I was young, but when in the forces, and of course I spent years and years in the forces during the war and after the war, and every Air Force has got a squash court, because they like to keep their pilots fresh, and so that squash was my sport up until I went back on the land, and then of course there was no opportunity to carry on with my squash, so I took over my tennis, and so I'm driving along Memorial Drive one day when the first year that I left the land, and I see a little notice outside it. Good tennis players wanted. In I go, and they say, yes, we would love to have you. You'd have to have tennis lessons unless you belong to a club. And I thought hard, and I thought, well, I belong to the Inglewood Tennis Club. And the Inglewood's the name of a property that was two away from us, where we used to play tennis on it. So on the basis of my Inglewood Tennis Club, I didn't have to do any lessons, and so that's how I came to be playing at the Memorial Drive, and then the seniors tennis club. So, and then I play once a week now on my son's property up in the hills. So that's the 4 times a week I play.
Yeah, right. And so, Henry, you've seen many great tennis players over the years. Who's your favourite to watch? You've seen the likes of Roger Federer, you've seen Rafael Nadal. These are the modern day tennis players, but is there one tennis player that you loved the most and just loved how they went about the game?
Well, the one that inspires me is Agassi, is that he kept on playing. And of course, you know, obviously that appeals to me. But I liked his approach to the game, and but Yannick Sinner's is the one that I like, because that when we had this, when I was 100, I suppose, that's when the Guinness Book of Records came out with Yannick, with Jaroslav Zoaneski, who was a 100-year-old, and they said he was the oldest competitive tennis player in the world. And then they said in the Memorial Drive, Henry, you're older. And I was 6 months older. So that's when they brought out this, another friend of mine, Jeffrey Reed, Reed Communications, who's in this kind of business. And he said, what we should do is bring out this Ukrainian tennis player and have a match in favour of the Ukrainian war effort. And that's what they did. You know, they brought him out from Ukraine and to Melbourne, to the Melbourne Open, where it's not generally known, but the professional tennis players have a charity that they support called the Players for Peace. And they said, you know, we can have it for the Players for Peace. And they raised $3 million.
Wow.
$3 million. You know, it was, and of course, you know, I played against, I have always trouble with remembering his name.
Zaraya? Zaraya, yep.
Yeah, and anyway, to walk along that, the underneath the grandstands at the Melbourne Open, it's a long tunnel, and on both sides of that tunnel, underneath the grandstands, they've got all the greats of tennis players. And I think it must be the culmination of everybody's dream is to be able to walk along that there and walk out into the little square at the end where you walk through the door, and then you turn under the centre court, and 15,000 people applaud. You know, it's something that's every tennis player must dream about, and I've done it.
And you've done it. Yeah, what an achievement.
Yeah. So anyway, it was a wonderful thing, and so I suppose that's the peak of my tennis career.
Well, not a bad peak to have, mate, to be out there, because everyone dreams of being either on. For me, it was on the SCG and walking out and batting for Australia, and that everyone's got a dream, and you've lived a dream that some young tennis player would hopefully one day do. So it's a remarkable story, and. It's a wonderful story. It is, and it's still going, and you'll be back out on the court tomorrow. So after we record this, you will be back out on the court. So it's amazing. And it's I love I've said how competitive it is, and I love it competitive, and that's why I go along to the Masters, where they have every 5 years. They start off at 30 or 35 to 40, 40 to 5, every 5 years. And the top one has been 80. But now they've got an 85s, over 80, over 85s, and so I don't have to pay down to the 80s anymore. So I've been doing this for years now, and it's a good excuse for an overseas holiday, and I love that competitive. And I'm still in there, Absolutely.
Good. And I'm getting better and better because all my peers are dying off all around me.
That's the competitive side of you coming out. So, what advice, Henry, would you give any young person that is you? As I said, you volunteered at 18 to serve your country. What advice would you give any young person that is looking to join the military today?
I think always be looking for your opportunities in life. We all get them, and so many people just pass them by and don't grab them, and that's reprehensible.
Yes.
In other words, you should be looking for your opportunities, not have them thrust in front of you. You should be looking for them, and because we all have these opportunities in life, and win or lose, you gain from them. It's terrific. So if I had to give any advice to anybody young, it'd be looking for your opportunities and have a go. In other words, even if you don't make it, you next time you have a go, you're more experienced. You know the traps, and you know where you're going, and that's it. So if I had any advice to give to anybody is look for your opportunities and grab them. Mm.
And you joining the military, has that shaped the rest of your life, of what you've gone on and achieved in your life from your military service?
Yes, it has. The three ways of doing anything: the right way, the wrong way, and the Navy way.
Well, the Navy is the senior service, so it is the senior service. So.
Well, it's worth remembering that the Navy's recruiting ground were the pubs of England. In other words, the press gangs went round the pubs of England to recruit their sailors, and they were the best fighting Navy in the world. In other words, they from that kind of background, they trained them.
Yep.
Yeah, and so that it's a proven system.
Absolutely. And apart from marrying your wife and having your children, was joining the Navy still the best decision you look at now in your life? Of that, your military service set you up for the rest of your life?
Yes, definitely. It gives you discipline.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of discipline in life. It's self-discipline, but yes, it's good. It's good. It's a proven system, and it's been going for a long, long time.
Yeah. And knowing what you know now and all that you've been through, what advice would you give if you could go back, give your 18-year-old self, and would he listen?
I think I would listen, because it was this Jimmy Melrose flying out from England, that inspired me. It just, in those days, it wasn't easy, and it was. He had to overcome a whole lot of things all along the way, and I'm absolutely sure. I've never met him, but I'm sure that when he got to Australia, he was a better man than he was when he left. Because he's experienced. He's been through a lot.
Yeah.
And that's where you learn, is going through a lot. And you don't go through a lot without having a go. You've got to have a go. And so that's what I would always say to anybody young, is take your life in both hands and do something with it. It's nice. It's nice for me to be able to think. We all like to think that we leave the world in a better place than we come. And I know that I've done it, because the home property became 4,000 acres, and that was 4,000 acres that was scrub.
Yep. And
every year now it produces hundreds of bales of wool and thousands of lambs and tons of wheat and it was me that did it.
Yeah.
It's a nice feeling, and that's what I think is, have a go.
And I think there's the old saying, Henry, that the harder you work, the luckier you become, and that is so true. That is so true.
Yes, and also it's enjoyable. It's. I like to win. Yes, and. And even if I don't win, I like to give it a good nudge, and and I've been lucky,
Absolutely, and I like your attitude to win. I like that too, because I like to win too, and I think most people like to win, but I think too it's a great point you touch on, that winning only teaches you so much. You learn a lot from your failures too. There's a lot of things that you. As you said, if you fail, try again. And next time, you go in it, you go, oh, well, that didn't work last time. I'll try this.
Yeah, it worked.
Yeah.
What I didn't say before, which I'd like to say,
of course,
was that my admiration for the bomber pilots. In other words, it's nice to fly, but the people, the heroes, I think, are the bomber pilots. All the bomber pilots do is they're given a course to fly and a height to fly. And whether they come back or not is just the luck of the game. And you also know that there's a probability there. And every time you fly, you know that the odds are higher. And so really they're the real heroes of the war. As opposed to the fighter pilots. The fighter pilots, you're paddling your own canoe, and if you win or lose, but it's based on yourself. And it's a bit like, I suppose, like the gunners in a plane. They have it in their own hands too, but the pilot doesn't. He's given a course to fly and a height to fly, and come what may, that's what you do. And whether you get back or not is in the hands of the gods, and every time you fly, it's a bit, the odds are higher. So it's not like being a fighter pilot. You've got your own, you paddle your own canoe, and I love that.
And that's a very great point you touch on there, Henry, because during World War II, Bomber Command suffered the highest casualty rates in basically all of flying. They suffered the most because a lot of them didn't come back. A lot of them, those raids in Germany, and they made a very big sacrifice in the war. And
we owe so much to them. It's unbelievable.
Absolutely, and I've been sitting here for the last hour, and it has just been an absolutely amazing experience to sit across from you. And as I said, you've lived more than a century now, and it's just your wisdom, your your vibrance for life that you have still to still keep going and still it's amazing. You're absolute inspiration. And so, Henry, before we finish, what are your plans going into the future now? What do you want to achieve with your family, with tennis? What do you want to do for going into the future?
I want to play in Japan. That's 2027, and I think I might just make it, and that would be a wonderful end to my time on Earth, my time on this Earth. It's I should have some lofty, aspirations, but that's really all. They love old people, and I qualify, and I like Japan, and have someone with me to mind me, and and apart from that, then I just enjoy life. Enjoy life. I've got nothing to do but enjoy myself. I retired at 70. Given time again to retire at 65 because my retirement years have been wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely, and still going. And I think if I know you and your winning attitude, you will get to Japan in 2027. So I have no doubt. So I can see that in the determination in your face. So you will get there. And
I'm working at it there.
Well, I want to thank your niece, actually. I want to thank Jennifer for putting me in touch with you to sit down and record with you. And I'd like to thank Jill as well, because Jill put this all together, and Jill is in the background, and she is Henry's carer and supporter. And I want to thank her for putting all of this together today. And I want to thank you for your time too, mate, because I know it's a Saturday and I know it's tennis day. So I do thank you for giving up your time to sit with me and record your story for history. And I want to finish with this. So, Henry, you have served your country with honour and brought pride to your family. Thank you for your service. And once again, I appreciate you coming on True Blue and sharing your story. It's been an absolute honour and a privilege. So thank you.
Been my pleasure, Adam.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. Real talk with those that pledge to keep us safe with grit, sacrifice and determination. See you next time.